The dust from the Kansas plains settled on Hannah Cole's worn boots as she stood at the edge of Lovelock, Nevada, holding a screaming infant against her chest while her 3-year-old son wailed beside her, his face red from hours of inconsolable crying. She had arrived on the afternoon stage with nothing but 2 carpetbags, a dead husband buried 3 months back in Missouri, and the crushing weight of knowing she had nowhere else to go except to the distant cousin who had written once, years ago, offering a place if times ever got hard. Times had gotten hard. The baby, little Sarah, had been colicky since birth, and her cries could pierce through the thickest walls and the most patient hearts. Her son, Thomas, had taken his father's death poorly and had developed a sensitivity that made him cry at the smallest provocation, at shadows and loud noises, and the mere memory of the life they had lost. Hannah's arms ached from carrying Sarah, and her heart ached from everything else. She looked down the main street of Lovelock, a town that seemed to shimmer in the Nevada heat, and wondered if her cousin even still lived here, if the address she clutched in her sweating palm would lead to sanctuary or just another closed door. She shifted Sarah to her other hip and took Thomas's hand, pulling him along as he sobbed about being tired and hungry and wanting to go home. Home did not exist anymore. Home had been sold to pay debts after the fever took her husband, James, leaving her with 2 children and the clothes on their backs. She walked slowly down the street, past the saloon where piano music drifted out into the afternoon, past the general store with its painted sign, past men who tipped their hats and women who glanced at her with something between pity and suspicion. The address led her to a small house at the end of a residential street, but when she knocked, a stranger answered. Her cousin had moved away a year ago, the woman said, gone to California with her new husband. No forwarding address. The door closed. Hannah stood on that porch with her children screaming and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She had $17 in her pocket and no plan beyond the one that had just crumbled to dust. She walked back toward the center of town, her mind racing through impossible calculations. A room at the boarding house, if they would take her with crying children. Work, if she could find it. Someone to watch the children while she worked, which seemed the most impossible task of all given how Thomas and Sarah could not be soothed by strangers, could barely be soothed by her. She found herself standing in front of a small restaurant, the kind of place that advertised home cooking and reasonable prices. Through the window, she could see it was busy with the dinner crowd, men mostly, eating plates of steak and potatoes. Sarah's cries had reached a fever pitch, and Thomas had sat down on the wooden sidewalk, refusing to walk another step. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Tall and lean with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the sky just after dawn. He wore dusty trousers, a worn shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a hat pushed back on his head revealing dark hair. He looked at her, then at the children, and something in his expression softened. "Madam," he said, his voice rough but kind. "Those children sound like they need some quiet and some food." Hannah felt tears spring to her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since arriving in town. "I apologize for disturbing the peace. We are just passing through." "Do not look like passing through to me," he said, and there was no judgment in his tone, just observation. "Looks like arriving. Come on inside. Meal is on me." "I cannot accept charity," Hannah said automatically, though her stomach clenched with hunger and she could not remember the last time Thomas had eaten a proper meal. "Not charity. Neighborliness. This is Lovelock. We take care of folks here." He held the door open and waited. Hannah hesitated only a moment before her practical nature won over her pride. She gathered Thomas up from the sidewalk and carried him inside, Sarah still wailing against her shoulder. The restaurant went quiet as they entered, all eyes turning toward the source of the noise. Hannah felt her face burn with embarrassment. The man led them to a table in the corner, away from most of the other diners. "Mabel," he called to a woman behind the counter, "can we get some milk for the little ones and 2 plates of whatever is hot?" Mabel, a round-faced woman with kind eyes, nodded and bustled away. The man pulled out a chair for Hannah, and she sank into it gratefully, settling Sarah in her lap while Thomas climbed into the chair beside her, his sobs quieting to hiccups. "Name is Henry Callahan," the man said, sitting down across from her. "Most folks call me Hank." "Hannah Gallagher," she said. "This is Thomas and Sarah. I apologize for the noise. Sarah has colic and Thomas is going through a difficult time." "Nothing to apologize for. Babies cry. It is what they do." Hank's tone was matter-of-fact, not dismissive. "You said you were passing through." Hannah debated how much to tell this stranger, but something about his steady gaze and the fact that he had not flinched at her children's tears made her trust him. "I came here to stay with a cousin, but she has moved away. I am a widow. My husband died 3 months ago." "I am sorry for your loss," Hank said, and the words sounded genuine. "You got anywhere else to go?" "No." The word came out smaller than she intended. Mabel brought milk and plates of beef stew with thick slices of bread. Thomas stopped crying the moment he saw the food and began eating with desperate hunger. Sarah continued to wail, and Hannah tried to eat one-handed while bouncing the baby, managing only a few bites before giving up. "Here," Hank said, standing up. "Let me take her for a minute so you can eat." Hannah stared at him. "She will not stop crying. She never stops." "Then she will not stop while I am holding her either, but at least your food will not get cold." He reached out his arms, and before Hannah could protest further, he had lifted Sarah from her lap with the easy confidence of someone who had held babies before. Sarah's cries did not diminish, but Hank walked with her toward the back of the restaurant, bouncing her gently and talking to her in a low voice that Hannah could not quite hear. She watched in amazement as he seemed completely unbothered by the infant's red-faced screaming, just continued his steady walking and gentle bouncing. Hannah turned to her stew and ate quickly, efficiently, aware that this might be the only hot meal she would have for days. Thomas was already halfway through his bowl, his tears forgotten in the face of food. When she finished, Hank returned with Sarah, who was still crying but perhaps a fraction less intensely. He handed her back carefully. "She is a determined little thing." "She gets that from her father," Hannah said softly. Hank sat back down. "Look, I do not mean to pry into your business, but if you need a place to stay for a bit while you figure things out, my sister runs a boarding house on Oak Street. She has got kids of her own, so the noise would not bother her none. I can talk to her if you want." Hannah wanted to maintain her pride, wanted to say she would figure it out herself, but practicality won again. "That would be very kind. I have some money enough to pay for a room for a while." "Good enough. Finish up and I will walk you over there." Hank stood and went to pay for the meal while Hannah cleaned Thomas's face with her handkerchief and gathered her bags. The boarding house was a large 2-story structure with a wide porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Hank's sister, Patricia, was a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense air and laugh lines around her eyes. She took one look at Hannah and the children and nodded. "I have got a room on the ground floor, away from the other guests. Your little ones can cry all they need to." She named a price that was reasonable, and Hannah paid for a week in advance, watching her small supply of money dwindle. The room was simple but clean, with a bed, a cradle that Patricia brought in, and a small cot for Thomas. There was a wash basin and a window that looked out onto a small garden. It was more than Hannah had hoped for. "Thank you," she said to Hank, who had carried her bags up to the room. "You have been incredibly kind to strangers. Like I said, this is Lovelock. We look after each other." He tipped his hat. "If you need anything, Patricia knows where to find me. I work at the Broken Bit Ranch, few miles outside town. Come into town most evenings." After he left, Hannah sat on the bed with Sarah finally, mercifully, falling into an exhausted sleep in the cradle. Thomas curled up on the cot and was asleep within minutes. In the quiet, Hannah allowed herself to cry silent tears that came from exhaustion and fear and the overwhelming gratitude for the kindness of a stranger who had not turned away from her children's cries. The next morning, Hannah woke to Sarah's screaming and Thomas's whimpering. She changed them, washed them as best she could in the basin, and dressed them in their only other set of clothes. She needed to find work, but the problem of the children loomed large. She could not work with them in tow, not when they cried constantly. Patricia knocked and entered with a breakfast tray. "Thought you might need this. Hard to get out with the little ones." "You are too kind. I will need to find work soon," Hannah said. "Do you know of anyone who might need help? I can clean, cook, so I am good with numbers." Patricia thought for a moment. The general store might need help, and the hotel sometimes needs housekeepers, but with the children it will be hard. "I know." Hannah's voice was flat with worry. "Tell you what, my oldest girl, she is 16 and good with babies. Maybe she could watch them for a few hours while you look for work. Not every day, but enough to get you started." Hannah felt her throat tighten with gratitude. "I could pay her a little. We will work something out. Let me go get Emma." By mid-morning, Hannah was walking down the main street of Lovelock without her children for the first time in months. Emma had taken them to the boarding house garden, and though Sarah was crying and Thomas was clinging to Emma's skirt, Hannah forced herself to walk away. She had to find work. The general store did not need help. The hotel had just hired someone. The dress shop was interested but wanted someone who could work full days, which Hannah could not promise with her children so difficult. By the time the sun was high and hot, Hannah felt desperation creeping back in. She was walking past the land office when she saw Hank coming out, papers in his hand. He saw her and smiled. "Mrs. Gallagher, how are you settling in? As well as can be expected. I am looking for work. Any luck?" "Not yet." She tried to keep the despair from her voice. Hank was quiet for a moment, studying her face. "Can you cook?" "Yes, quite well. The Broken Bit, where I work, they are looking for someone to help in the kitchen. Old Cookie is getting too old to handle all the meals for the ranch hands. It would not be in town, though. You would need to come out to the ranch. With the children, boss would not mind, long as the work gets done. Ranch is used to noise. We got chickens and cattle and horses making racket all day. Few crying kids would not make a difference." Hannah felt hope flutter in her chest. "Do you think he would really consider me? I can ask him. Better yet, I can take you out there this afternoon so you can ask him yourself." I was heading back anyway. By 2 o'clock, Hannah was sitting in a wagon beside Hank with Thomas on her lap and Sarah in a sling against her chest. The baby was crying, as usual, and Thomas was whimpering. But Hank drove the wagon with easy competence, occasionally pointing out landmarks and telling Thomas about the horses they would see at the ranch. The Broken Bit was a sprawling property with a large ranch house, several outbuildings, corrals, and pastures that stretched toward distant mountains. The owner, Mr. Brennan, was a weathered man in his 60s with a gruff voice but kind eyes. He listened to Hannah's situation while Sarah screamed between them, and he did not flinch once. "You can cook for 30 men?" he asked. "Yes, sir." 3 meals a day plus fixings for the ones who are out on the range?" "Yes, sir." "And you will bring the children, if that is acceptable?" "They will not interfere with my work." Mr. Brennan looked at Sarah, who was purple-faced with crying. "That one always this loud. She has colic. The doctor says she will grow out of it, but it could take months." "Well, my hearing is not what it used to be anyway." He almost smiled. "You can start tomorrow. Pay is $30 a month plus meals for you and the children. There is a small cabin out back that old Cookie used. You can stay there if you want. Save on your boarding house fees." Hannah's heart soared. $30 a month was more than she had hoped for, and a cabin meant independence. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan. You will not regret this." "See that I do not." "Hank, show her the cabin and the kitchen." The cabin was tiny, just 2 rooms, but it was sturdy and had a stove and a real bed. The kitchen was large and well equipped, and Hannah immediately began planning menus in her head. Hank helped her carry her few belongings from the wagon into the cabin, and Thomas explored the new space with cautious curiosity, while Sarah continued her endless crying. "This is a good thing you did," Hannah said to Hank as he set down her last bag. "Recommending me for this job. I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed. You needed work and we needed a cook. Works out for everyone." He paused at the door. "I bunk with the other hands, so I will be around if you need anything. First few days might be rough, learning where everything is and how Cookie did things, but you will figure it out." That night, in her own cabin for the first time, Hannah put Thomas to bed and rocked Sarah until the baby finally fell into fitful sleep. She stood at the window looking out at the darkened ranch, watching the lights in the bunkhouse and the big house, and felt something she had not felt in months: possibility. The work was hard. She woke before dawn to start breakfast, prepared lunch, and cooked dinner, all while managing 2 crying children. But the ranch hands were patient, and Mr. Brennan never complained about the noise. Several of the younger hands even took turns entertaining Thomas, teaching him about horses and ropes and showing him the new calves. Hank was there every day, morning and evening, always with a kind word or a helping hand. He would sit with Thomas while Hannah cooked, telling the boy stories about the cattle drives he had been on, about horses he had known, about the land they worked. And when Sarah cried, which was almost constantly, Hank would sometimes take her and walk with her while Hannah worked, seemingly unbothered by the screaming infant. "You have a gift with children," Hannah told him one evening as he handed Sarah back, the baby red-faced but slightly quieter. "I had a younger sister who had colic, long time ago. I remember my ma walking the floors with her night after night. She grew out of it eventually." "What happened to your sister?" "She is back east, married to a shopkeeper, has 4 kids of her own now." There was fondness in his voice. Hannah studied him as he spoke, noting the gentle way he held himself around Thomas, the patience he showed when the boy asked endless questions. Most men would have avoided her and her crying children, seeing them as nuisances or burdens. Hank treated them as if they were just part of the landscape, no more remarkable than the cattle or the horses. "Your wife must be a lucky woman," Hannah said before she could stop herself. Hank looked surprised. "I am not married, never have been." "Oh." "I assumed, with how good you are with children. Just because I know how to hold a baby does not mean I have one of my own." He smiled slightly. "Never found the right woman, I suppose, or never stayed in one place long enough to look properly." Hannah felt her face warm and changed the subject quickly, asking about the next day's menu. But later, lying in bed with Sarah finally asleep beside her and Thomas breathing softly in his cot, she thought about Hank Callahan and his quiet kindness. And for the first time since her husband's death, she felt a small flutter of something that might have been attraction. The weeks passed, and Hannah settled into the rhythm of the ranch. She grew to know the hands by name, learned their preferences for meals, figured out how to manage the large kitchen efficiently even with Sarah crying and Thomas underfoot. Her cooking was good, better than old cookies had been, and the men appreciated it. Hank continued to help her in small ways. He fixed the door on the cabin when it started sticking. He brought her firewood without being asked. He entertained Thomas while she cooked, and he walked with Sarah when the baby's cries became too much. He never complained, never showed frustration, never treated her children as anything but welcome. Hannah found herself watching for him, listening for his voice among the hands at mealtimes, feeling a lift in her spirits when he appeared at the kitchen door. She told herself it was just gratitude, just appreciation for a kind man who had helped her when she needed it most. But her heart knew differently. One evening in late summer, after the dinner dishes were washed and the children finally asleep, Hannah sat on the small porch of her cabin watching the stars emerge. She heard footsteps and knew without looking that it was Hank. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Please." He settled onto the porch step beside her, stretching out his long legs. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "Sarah is getting better," Hank said eventually. "I noticed she did not cry as much today. She is finally starting to grow out of the colic. The doctor said it could take 6 months, and it has been almost that long." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes at the relief of it. "And Thomas is doing better too. He smiles now, he plays. He is starting to be himself again." "You have done good by them. Cannot be easy doing it all alone." "I have not been alone. You have helped more than you know." Hank was quiet for a moment. "Hannah, can I ask you something, of course? Do you ever think about the future, beyond just getting through each day?" Hannah considered the question carefully. "I suppose I have been too focused on surviving to think much beyond that. Why do you ask?" "Because I think about it. I think about staying in one place, building something lasting. I am 32 years old, and I have been drifting from ranch to ranch since I was 16. I am tired of drifting. Lovelock seems like a good place to settle. It does." He turned to look at her, his face shadowed in the dusk. "Especially lately." Hannah's heart began to beat faster. "Hank, I know it has not been long since your husband passed. I know you are still grieving. But I want you to know that I care about you, Hannah. I care about Thomas and Sarah too. These past months, getting to know you all, it has made me think about what I want from life. And what I want includes you." Hannah felt a wave of emotion crash over her, fear and hope and guilt and longing all mixed together. "I do not know what to say. James has only been gone 4 months. I am not asking you to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know where my heart is. And I want you to know that I will wait, however long you need. And if you decide that you do not feel the same way, I will accept that and still be your friend. You would do that. Wait, knowing I might never return your feelings. Hannah, I have watched you manage 2 crying children while cooking for 30 men and never once complaining. I have seen you comfort Thomas when he wakes up crying for his father. I have seen you pace the floors at midnight with Sarah when she will not stop screaming. You are the strongest, most determined woman I have ever met. Yes, I would wait. You are worth waiting for." Hannah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I do not know if I deserve such devotion. You deserve everything good in this world, you and those children." Hank stood up slowly. "I will let you be, but I wanted you to know." After he left, Hannah sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about James and the life they had built together, the love they had shared. He had been a good man, a good husband and father. His death had shattered her world. But here, in this Nevada town, she was building something new from the pieces. And Hank Callahan was part of that new world, whether she had intended it or not. The truth was, she did have feelings for Hank. They had been growing slowly, quietly, like plants in shade that suddenly find sunlight. His kindness, his patience, his steady presence had worked their way into her heart without her fully realizing it. But was it too soon? What would people say? What would James have wanted for her? She thought about her husband's last words to her, spoken from his sick bed as the fever raged. "Take care of our children," he had said. "And do not be alone forever, Hannah. You have too much love in you to waste it on grief. Promise me you will let yourself be happy again." She had promised, though she could not imagine being happy again in that moment. But now, sitting on this porch under Nevada stars, she could imagine it. She could imagine a future with Hank, could imagine Thomas having a father figure again, could imagine Sarah growing up knowing this kind man who had never once complained about her crying. The next morning, Hannah made her decision. She waited until after breakfast when the hands had dispersed to their work and she had a moment alone with Hank. "I need to talk to you," she said. Hank looked concerned. "Is everything all right? Walk with me." They strolled toward the corrals, where horses nickered softly in the morning sun. Hannah had left Thomas with one of the older hands who was mending tack, and Sarah was asleep in the sling against her chest, blessedly quiet. "I thought about what you said last night," Hannah began. "And I need to be honest with you. I do have feelings for you, Hank. You have been nothing but kind to me and my children since the moment we met. You have never complained about the crying or the chaos or the fact that I came with so much baggage. You have just accepted us." "But," Hank said quietly, "no, but I am saying yes if you are asking." Hank stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Yes. Yes, I care about you. I think I might even love you, though it frightens me to say it. And I think my children already love you. Thomas talks about you constantly, and Sarah falls asleep faster when you hold her. If you are willing to take on a widow with 2 young children, one of whom cries all the time, then I am willing to take a chance on happiness again." The smile that spread across Hank's face was like sunrise. "Hannah, you have made me the happiest man in Nevada." "We should take it slowly," Hannah cautioned, "for the children's sake. As slow as you need, though I should tell you there is nothing slow about how I feel." Over the following months, Hannah and Hank courted in the particular way of 2 people who were already deeply embedded in each other's daily lives. There were evening walks after dinner, conversations on the cabin porch after the children slept, stolen moments of hand-holding when no one was watching. Hank made Thomas a wooden horse, carved with care and painted brown. He bought a rattle for Sarah, who had finally, blessedly, grown out of her colic and could now smile and laugh like other babies. The ranch hands noticed, of course. Men who lived and worked together missed nothing, but they approved. Several told Hank he was lucky, and one of the older hands told Hannah she had found a good man. Mr. Brennan called them both into his office one day in late autumn. Hannah's heart pounded, worried that he was going to object to their relationship, that it would cost her the job. "I am not blind," Mr. Brennan said without preamble. "I see what is going on between you 2, and I am glad of it. Hank is one of my best men, and you are the best cook this ranch has ever had. Seems to me you are good for each other." Hannah relaxed slightly. "We are trying to be respectful, sir." "I do not care about respectful. I care about happy workers who do their jobs well. You are both that, so I am going to make you an offer. There is a house on the far edge of the property, been sitting empty since my foreman moved into town. It is bigger than the cabin, has a real kitchen and 3 bedrooms. If you 2 are planning to make this official, I would like you to take it. Think of it as a wedding present." Hannah and Hank looked at each other in surprise. "We have not actually discussed marriage yet, sir," Hank said. "Well, discuss it. In the meantime, the offer stands." Mr. Brennan went back to his paperwork, dismissing them. Outside, Hannah let out a breath. "That was unexpected. He is a good man, gruff but fair." Hank took her hand. "Hannah, I know we said we would go slow, but if Mr. Brennan is offering us a house, maybe we should think about making it official. Will you marry me?" Hannah's heart swelled. "Yes. "Yes, I will marry you, Hank Callahan." They were married in November, in a simple ceremony at the church in Lovelock with Patricia and Mr. Brennan as witnesses. Thomas stood beside them in his best clothes, holding a ring with solemn importance. Sarah, now 6 months old and finally happy, gurgled contentedly in Patricia's arms throughout the ceremony. Afterward, there was a celebration at the ranch with food and music and dancing. The ranch hands gave gifts they had made themselves: a carved picture frame, a quilt pieced together from old shirts, a rocking chair for the new house. The women from town brought food and advice and warm wishes. As Hannah danced with her new husband under lanterns strung across the barn, she thought about how much her life had changed in just a few months. She had arrived in Lovelock with nothing but 2 crying children and $17, and now she had a home, a job, a community, and a man who loved her and her children without reservation. "What are you thinking about?" Hank asked, pulling her closer. "About how I thought my life was over when James died, about how I could not imagine ever being happy again, and now here I am, happier than I have been in a long time. You deserve all of this and more. So do you. You deserve a wife who is not exhausted all the time, whose children do not cry constantly, who can give you her full attention." Hank shook his head. "I got exactly the wife I wanted. You came with Thomas and Sarah, and I would not have it any other way. They are my children now, too." Hannah felt tears gather, but they were good tears, happy tears. "You never complained, you know. Not once through all the crying and the chaos and the sleepless nights. Most men would have run in the other direction. I am not most men, and besides, they are good kids. Thomas is smart and kind, and Sarah has got a will that is going to serve her well in life. I am lucky to get to be their father." The house Mr. Brennan had given them was indeed bigger, with a kitchen that Hannah loved, a bedroom for them, and a room for Thomas and Sarah to share. They moved in the day after the wedding, and Hannah spent hours arranging their few possessions and making the space feel like home. Thomas adapted to the change beautifully. He started calling Hank Papa within the first week, and Hank never corrected him, just accepted the title with quiet pride. He taught Thomas to ride, to rope, to care for the horses. The boy bloomed under the attention, becoming more confident and outgoing. Sarah thrived too. Without the colic, she was a happy baby who loved to laugh and play. She would light up when Hank came home in the evenings, reaching for him with chubby arms. Hank would scoop her up and spin her around, delighting in her giggles. As winter settled over Nevada, bringing cold nights and occasional snow, Hannah felt herself settling into this new life. She still grieved James sometimes, particularly on days when Thomas would say something that reminded her sharply of his father, or when she would catch herself starting to tell James about her day before remembering he was gone. But the grief no longer consumed her. It existed alongside her new happiness, a part of her history but not her whole story. One evening, as they sat by the fire with the children asleep, Hank asked her about James. "You never talk about him much. I do not want you to feel like you cannot." Hannah was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "James was a good man. We met when I was 18 and he was 20. He was a farmer's son, steady and reliable. We had a good marriage, a quiet life. When Thomas was born, James was so proud. And then when I got pregnant with Sarah, we were so happy, even though money was tight. What happened to him? Fever. It came on fast. One day he was fine, the next he was burning up. The doctor did what he could, but it was not enough. He died within 3 days. Hannah's voice wavered. He made me promise not to be alone forever. He wanted me to find happiness again. Do you think he would approve of me? I think he would appreciate that you never complained about the crying. He would appreciate that you are patient with Thomas and kind to Sarah. He would be grateful that you love them like your own. Hank reached over and took her hand. I do love them, and I love you. I love you too. I know it has not been long, and maybe some people would say it is too fast, but I know my own heart. You are a good man, Hank Callahan, and I am grateful every day that you were in that restaurant the day I arrived. Best day of my life, Hank said. Even with all the crying. They both laughed, and Hannah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling content. The winter brought challenges. Sarah got a cold that had Hannah worried, but Hank stayed up with her through the night, walking and rocking her until the fever broke. Thomas caught it next, and again Hank was there, patient and steady, entertaining the sick boy with stories and games. You are good at this, Hannah told him as he sat beside Thomas's bed, reading from a book of fairy tales. At what? Being a father. Hank looked over at her, something soft in his expression. I had a good teacher. My own father was patient and kind. I always hoped I would be the same when my time came. Your parents would be proud of you. They died a few years back within months of each other, but I think they would like you and the children. As spring arrived, bringing warmth and wildflowers to the Nevada landscape, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Joy at the new life, anxiety about managing another baby, and a strange guilt that she could not quite name. When she told Hank, he lifted her off the ground and spun her around, his face alight with happiness. A baby, our baby. You are happy, Hannah, I am thrilled. Thomas and Sarah will always be my children, but to have one that is ours from the start, that we made together, it is a blessing I did not dare hope for. His joy was infectious, and Hannah allowed herself to share in it. They told Thomas, who was excited about being a big brother, and showed Sarah, who was too young to understand but clapped her hands anyway. The pregnancy was easier than her pregnancy with Sarah had been. Hannah felt well, continued her work in the kitchen with help from a new assistant Mr. Brennan hired, and watched her belly grow with a sense of wonder. Hank was attentive without being overbearing. He took on extra work around the house, made sure Hannah rested, and rubbed her swollen feet in the evenings. He talked to her belly, telling the baby about the ranch and the horses and the family it would be born into. You want a boy or a girl? Hannah asked him one evening. I do not care either way. Healthy is all that matters. But if you had a preference, Hank thought about it. A girl would be nice, a little sister for Sarah. But a boy would be good too, another brother for Thomas. Truly, I will be happy with whatever we get. The baby was born in late autumn, a year almost to the day after Hannah and Hank's wedding. It was a girl, tiny and perfect, with Hank's eyes and Hannah's dark hair. They named her Catherine after Hank's mother and called her Katie. Hank held his daughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face. She is perfect. You are perfect. Thank you, Hannah. Hannah, exhausted but elated, watched her husband cradle their daughter and felt a wave of love so intense it took her breath away. This was her family. Hank, Thomas, Sarah, and now Katie. This was her life, built from the ashes of her old one. Katie was a quiet baby, nothing like Sarah had been. She slept well, ate well, and seemed content to observe the world with her big blue eyes. Thomas was fascinated by her, wanting to help with every aspect of her care. Sarah, now a toddler, was less interested, but would occasionally pat the baby's head with her chubby hand. As Katie grew, the family grew into their new dynamic. Hank continued to work the ranch, now as foreman after Mr. Brennan promoted him, recognizing his hard work and dedication. Hannah continued to cook, though with more help now, allowing her time to care for 3 young children. The house rang with noise, children playing, baby crying, laughter and arguments, and the general chaos of family life. And through it all, Hank never complained. When Thomas accidentally broke a window playing with a ball, Hank patiently taught him how to fix it. When Sarah had a tantrum in the middle of the general store, Hank calmly carried her out and sat with her until she calmed down. When Katie woke up crying in the middle of the night, Hank was there before Hannah could get out of bed, scooping up his daughter and walking with her. "You are going to spoil them," Hannah told him one evening as he played on the floor with all 3 children, making them laugh with funny voices and exaggerated expressions. "That is my job. You keep them fed and clothed and educated. I get to spoil them. That is not how it works." "It is how I am making it work." He grinned at her, and she could not help but grin back. 2 years after Katie's birth, Hannah found herself pregnant again. This time, there was no complex mix of emotions, just pure joy. Hank was over the moon, and the children were excited to have another sibling. The pregnancy was smooth, and in the spring, they welcomed another daughter, whom they named Mary after Hannah's mother. Mary was an easy baby, content and smiley, and she fit seamlessly into the family. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The children grew. Thomas started school in Lovelock, riding into town each day with Hank and returning in the afternoons bursting with stories about what he had learned. Sarah was a spirited toddler who kept Hannah on her toes, always into something, always asking questions. Katie was the peacemaker, calm and thoughtful even at a young age. Mary was the baby, cooed over and doted on by everyone. Hank and Hannah's love deepened with time. They knew each other's rhythms, knew how to support each other through hard days and celebrate good ones. They still made time for each other, still went on evening walks after the children were in bed, still talked about their dreams and fears and hopes. One evening, about 5 years after their wedding, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset paint the Nevada sky in shades of orange and pink. Thomas was practicing his roping with one of the ranch hands. Sarah and Katie were playing a complicated game involving dolls and a pretend tea party. Mary was asleep in Hannah's arms. "You ever think about that first day?" Hank asked. "When you arrived in Lovelock with Sarah screaming and Thomas crying?" "I think about it often. I was so scared, so lost. I had no idea what I was going to do. And now look at you, look at us. 4 children, a home, a good life. It is more than I ever hoped for when I stepped off that stage. You gave me this, Hank. You gave us this. We gave each other this. You took a chance on a cowboy who was probably too forward in offering help to a stranger. You let me into your life and your children's lives. You let me love you. You made it easy to be loved. You never complained, not once, through all the crying and the chaos and the hard times. You just loved us." Hank reached over and took her free hand. "That is all I ever wanted to do. Love you and these children, build a life with you, grow old with you. We are doing that, growing old together. We have got a lot more growing to do yet." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play, watching the sun set on another day. Hannah thought about James sometimes still, with fondness and a gentle sadness. He had given her Thomas and Sarah, had loved her well in the time they had together. But Hank had given her a future, had taken her broken family and made it whole again, had loved her children as his own without hesitation or complaint. Years passed, and the children continued to grow. Thomas became a young man who worked alongside Hank on the ranch, learning the trade and proving himself capable and hardworking. He remembered his biological father, but considered Hank his real father in every way that mattered. Sarah grew into a spirited young woman who wanted to be a teacher, who loved books and learning and debating anything and everything. Hank supported her dreams, even when others questioned the value of education for a girl. Katie was the quiet, steady one, who loved animals and spent hours caring for the ranch horses and the various creatures she adopted. Hank taught her everything he knew about animal husbandry, and she soaked it up like a sponge. Mary was the social butterfly, always making friends, always planning gatherings and parties. She brought laughter and light wherever she went, and Hank encouraged her natural warmth and openness. Mr. Brennan eventually retired and sold the ranch to Hank, who had saved and worked and proven himself worthy of the responsibility. Hank renamed it the Callahan Ranch, and it became one of the most respected operations in Nevada. Hannah's cooking became legendary in Lovelock and beyond. People would travel from other towns just to eat at the Callahan Ranch when they had their occasional public events. She published a small cookbook of her recipes, which sold well and brought in extra income. Through it all, through the successes and the failures, the good years and the hard ones, Hank never complained. When drought hit and they struggled to keep the cattle fed, he worked longer hours without complaint. When Sarah got sick with scarlet fever and they spent weeks nursing her back to health, he sat beside her bed night after night without complaint. When Thomas went through a rebellious phase as a teenager, Hank weathered the storm with patience and understanding, never raising his voice or his hand. Hannah watched her husband with wonder and gratitude, knowing she had been blessed beyond measure to find him. One evening, when they had been married for nearly 20 years, they sat on the same porch where they had courted all those years ago. The children were grown or nearly so. Thomas was 22 and engaged to a nice girl from town. Sarah was 20 and away at teaching school. Katie was 15 and already showing signs of becoming an excellent rancher. Mary was 13 and full of dreams and schemes. Can you believe it has been 20 years? Hannah asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. Feels like yesterday and forever all at once. Do you ever regret it, taking on a widow with 2 crying children? Hank turned to look at her, his face serious. Hannah, I have never regretted a single moment. You and those children and the ones we made together, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Taking you on was not taking on a burden. It was receiving a gift. Even when Sarah cried all night with colic, even when Thomas threw tantrums in the middle of town, even when everything was chaos and noise and exhaustion, even then, especially then, because those moments taught me what it means to be a father, to be a husband. They taught me patience and love and what it means to show up for the people you care about. You always showed up. You never complained once. What was there to complain about? I got to be part of a family. I got to watch children grow up. I got to love you. That is not something to complain about. That is something to be grateful for every single day. Hannah felt tears slip down her cheeks. After 20 years, this man could still move her to tears with his simple honesty and his unwavering love. I love you, Hank Callahan. I love you too, Hannah Callahan. They sat together as the stars came out over Nevada, holding hands like they had when they were new to each other, but with the comfortable ease of 2 people who had built a life together brick by brick, day by day, through crying babies and colicky children and all the beautiful chaos of family. In the years that followed, they became grandparents. Thomas and his wife gave them 3 grandchildren who ran wild on the ranch just as their father had. Sarah married a fellow teacher and had twins who loved to visit during summers. Katie eventually took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch, proving herself more than capable, and later married a kind veterinarian who shared her love of animals. Mary became a music teacher and filled her life and everyone else's with song and joy. Hank and Hannah grew old together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing, but their love never diminishing. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, talking about their children and grandchildren, remembering the early days when everything was uncertain and difficult. "You remember that first night?" Hannah would ask. "When you walked Sarah around the restaurant while I ate and she cried the whole time? I remember thinking that if a woman could manage all that and still keep going, she must be the strongest person I had ever met," Hank would reply. "And I remember thinking that if a man could hold a screaming baby and not complain, he must be special. We found each other at just the right time." We did. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th. The ranch continued to prosper under Katie's management. The grandchildren grew, and some of them had children of their own, making Hank and Hannah great-grandparents. Through it all, they remained devoted to each other, a testament to the power of kindness and patience and love. When Hank was 72, he got sick. It started as a cough that would not go away and turned into something more serious. The doctor did what he could, but they both knew that time was limited. "I am not afraid," Hank told Hannah as they lay in bed one night, his breathing labored. "I've had a good life. Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do not talk like that, you are going to get better." "Hannah, we both know that is not true, and it is okay. I am ready when the time comes, but I want you to know something first." "What?" "Marrying you, taking on Thomas and Sarah, building our family together. It was the best decision I ever made. I never regretted it. I never complained about it. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Hannah was crying now, holding his hand tightly. "You gave me everything. You gave me a life when I thought mine was over. You loved my children like they were your own. You never made me feel like a burden. You were never a burden. You were a blessing. You and those crying babies were the biggest blessing of my life." Hank died a few days later, peacefully in his sleep with Hannah beside him. The funeral was attended by everyone in Lovelock and many from beyond, a testament to the life he had lived and the people he had touched. His children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren mourned him, this man who had been father and grandfather and great-grandfather, who had built something lasting from patience and kindness. Hannah grieved him deeply, but she did not regret their time together. She had been loved well by two good men in her life, and she had loved them both in return. She had raised 4 children and helped raise many grandchildren. She had built a good life from the ruins of her first one, and it was all because a cowboy had been willing to hold a crying baby and never complain about it. She lived several more years after Hank's death, surrounded by family, cared for by her children. She spent her time telling stories about Hank, about James, about the early days in Lovelock when everything was uncertain. She made sure her grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew the story of how she had arrived with nothing but 2 crying children and $17, and how a kind cowboy had changed everything. When Hannah died at 84, she was buried beside Hank on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her children arranged the funeral, and people came from all over to pay their respects. They told stories about Hannah's cooking, about her strength, about her kindness. But mostly they told stories about Hannah and Hank, about a love that had started with a crying baby and a patient man, and had grown into something beautiful and lasting. Thomas, now in his 60s himself, stood at his mother's grave and thought about the life she had lived. He barely remembered his biological father, but he remembered Hank vividly. He remembered how Hank had never treated him as anything less than a son, how he had been patient when Thomas cried for his dead father, how he had taught him to be a man. Sarah stood beside her brother, remembering how Hank had encouraged her dreams of education when others had told her it was not appropriate for a woman. He had paid for her schooling, had been proud when she graduated, had never made her feel like her ambitions were wrong. Katie thought about how Hank had taught her everything about ranching, had never told her she could not do something because she was a girl, had supported her when she wanted to take over the ranch operations. Mary remembered a father who had sung with her, who had encouraged her love of music, who had danced with her at her wedding and told her she deserved every happiness. And all four of them thought about how their mother and father had loved each other, how they had built something beautiful from difficult circumstances, how they had shown them what real love looked like. The Callahan Ranch continued to operate, passed down through the generations. The family grew and spread, but they always came back to Lovelock, to the place where it all started. They told the story of Hannah and Hank to their children and grandchildren, making sure the legacy of kindness and patience and unwavering love was not forgotten. In Lovelock, Nevada, there is still a plaque at the restaurant where Hannah and Hank first met. It tells the story of a widow who arrived with 2 crying children and a cowboy who never complained, who fell in love and built a life that touched generations. People still stop to read it, still find inspiration in the simple truth that sometimes the most powerful love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about showing up day after day, about holding a crying baby without complaint, about choosing kindness and patience over frustration and resentment. The story of Hannah and Hank became part of Lovelock's history, a reminder that good things can come from hard times, that love can bloom in unexpected places, that family is not always about blood but about choice and commitment. Their love story was not dramatic or flashy. It was quiet and steady, built on small kindnesses and daily choices, on never complaining when things were hard, on loving children who needed a father and a woman who needed a partner. It was a love story for the ages, told and retold, inspiring others to be kinder, more patient, more willing to see past difficulties to the blessings underneath. And it all started on a dusty Nevada afternoon in 1885. When a widow with 2 crying children met a cowboy who saw not a burden but an opportunity to love, and who seized that opportunity with both hands and never let go. Their children made sure the cabin where Hannah had first lived on the ranch was preserved, turned into a small museum of sorts with photographs and mementos from their parents' life. Visitors could see the cradle where Sarah had slept, finally outgrowing her colic. They could see the wooden horse Hank had carved for Thomas. They could read letters between Hannah and Hank during the brief periods they had been apart, filled with everyday details and declarations of love. The kitchen where Hannah had cooked was still in use, though modernized, and the family made sure that her recipes were still prepared for special occasions. The recipe book she had published became a collector's item, copies passed down through the family and treasured. But more than any physical objects, what lasted was the example they had set. Their descendants learned from them about commitment, about loving people as they are rather than as you wish they would be, about the power of never complaining when things are hard. They learned that family is built through daily acts of care and patience, that love is as much about showing up in difficult moments as it is about celebrating happy ones. The town of Lovelock itself kept the memory alive. School children learned about the Callahans as part of local history. The church had a stained glass window donated by the family, showing a cowboy holding a baby and a woman with a child by her side, both looking toward a bright horizon. The window was dedicated to the memory of Hannah and Hank Callahan, whose love had blessed the community and whose example continued to inspire. As decades passed, and the 20th century gave way to the 21st, the story remained relevant. In a world that often seemed to value convenience over commitment, the story of a cowboy who married a widow with crying children and never complained stood as a counter-narrative. It reminded people that the best things in life often come with challenges, that love requires patience and perseverance, that choosing to stay through the difficult times creates bonds that nothing can break. The Callahan descendants spread across the country, but they maintained their connection to Lovelock and to each other. Every 5 years, they held a family reunion at the ranch, where hundreds of people gathered to celebrate their shared heritage. They would tour the museum, visit the graves on the hill, share stories passed down through the generations. The youngest children would hear for the first time about their great-great-great-grandmother, who had arrived with nothing, and their great-great-great-grandfather, who had seen her value immediately. One of Thomas's great-granddaughters became a writer and published a novel based on Hannah and Hank's story. It became a bestseller, touching hearts around the world. Readers wrote to say the story had inspired them to be more patient with their own children, to appreciate their partners more, to see difficulties as opportunities for growth rather than reasons to complain. A descendant of Sarah's became a therapist who specialized in blended families, drawing on the example of how Hank had seamlessly accepted Thomas and Sarah as his own. She often shared their story with clients who were struggling to merge families, showing them that it was possible to love children who were not biologically yours as deeply as any parent could love. Katie's descendants continued to run the ranch, now one of the most successful in Nevada. They employed modern techniques but maintained the values Hank had established: fair treatment of workers, respect for the land and animals, commitment to community. The ranch was known for giving second chances to people who needed them, just as Hank had given Hannah a chance when she needed it most. Mary's descendants became musicians and teachers, spreading joy and knowledge just as she had. One of her great-grandsons composed a symphony inspired by Hannah and Hank's story, which was performed by orchestras across the country. The piece captured the chaos of those early days with dissonant notes that gradually resolved into harmony, representing how love had brought order and peace to difficult circumstances. The legacy of Hannah and Hank Callahan lived on not just in their descendants, but in the values they had embodied and passed down. Their story became part of the larger narrative of the American West, a reminder that alongside the tales of outlaws and gold rushes and cattle drives were quieter stories of love and family, of ordinary people doing extraordinary things through simple commitment and kindness. In Lovelock, the restaurant where they had met was still operating, now run by the great-great-grandchildren of the original owners. They kept one table permanently reserved as a memorial, with a small bronze plaque telling the story of that first meeting. Couples often asked to sit at that table, hoping some of Hannah and Hank's enduring love would rub off on them. The boarding house where Hannah had first stayed was now a bed and breakfast, lovingly restored and filled with period furnishings. Guests could stay in the room Hannah had occupied that first night, could stand at the window where she had looked out and wondered if she would survive. The current owners made sure every guest knew the story, how this room had been a temporary refuge for a desperate widow who had no idea she was about to meet the love of her life. The general store still stood, though much expanded, and it kept a photograph of Hannah and Hank on the wall. The photograph had been taken on their 20th anniversary, and it showed them surrounded by their children, all of them smiling. Hannah looked tired but content, and Hank had his arms around her and Thomas, his love for his family evident in his expression. As the years continued to pass, new generations discovered the story and found meaning in it. In an age of instant gratification and easy divorces, the tale of a love that had lasted through crying babies and colicky children and all the other trials of life resonated deeply. People wanted to believe that kind of love was still possible, that patience and commitment could still create lasting bonds. The story was taught in schools not just in Lovelock, but across Nevada, as an example of the human side of Western history. While other lessons focused on the gold rush or the building of the railroads, this lesson focused on family and community, on how ordinary people built lives and loved each other through challenges. Churches used the story as an example of committed love in their marriage preparation classes. Counselors referenced it when working with couples struggling with blended family issues. Parent groups shared it as encouragement when dealing with difficult children. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the simplest one. The reminder that everyone deserves someone who will not complain about their baggage, who will see them in their most difficult moments and choose to stay anyway, who will love not despite the challenges but through them. Hannah had arrived in Lovelock believing her life was over, that no one would want a widow with 2 crying children. Hank had proven her wrong, showing her that the right person would see not a burden but an opportunity to love. Their story reminded people that sometimes the most romantic thing is not a grand gesture but a quiet commitment, not a dramatic declaration but steady presence through difficult times. Hank had never written Hannah poetry or bought her expensive gifts. His love had been expressed through holding crying babies, teaching a traumatized boy to rope, providing for a family that had not been his by birth, but became his by choice. And Hannah's love had been in trusting Hank with her children's hearts, in letting him become their father, in choosing to believe that happiness was possible again, even when grief still weighed heavy on her shoulders. Together, they had created something beautiful from broken pieces, and that creation had blessed not just their immediate family but generations that followed. As the sun set on another day in Lovelock, Nevada, the light gilded the hills where Hannah and Hank Callahan lay buried together. Their names on the shared headstone had been weathered by time but were still clearly legible, along with the inscription their children had chosen. They loved well and complained never. Their legacy lives on in those they loved and those who love still. And indeed, their legacy did live on. In every descendant who chose patience over frustration, in every person who heard their story and decided to stay through difficulties rather than run, in every community member who remembered that kindness costs nothing but can change everything. The cowboy who had married the widow with the crying children and never complained about any of it had done more than build a family. He had created a testament to the power of steadfast love, and that testament would endure for as long as people needed reminders that the best things in life are often found in the most unexpected places, that love grows deepest when it is tested, and that choosing to stay through the hard times creates bonds that nothing can break. Their story was complete, their lives fully lived, their love fully expressed. And in Lovelock, Nevada, and in the hearts of those who remembered them, Hannah and Hank Callahan would live forever, an example of what love looks like when it is real and true and unwavering. Their happily ever after had not been easy, but it had been real, earned through daily choices and quiet commitments. And that made it all the more beautiful, all the more inspiring, all the more worth remembering and passing down through the generations. The end of their earthly story was just the beginning of their eternal legacy, a legacy of love that asked nothing but gave everything, that saw difficulties as opportunities, that never complained but always celebrated. It was a legacy that would continue as long as there were people who believed in the power of commitment, the beauty of patience, and the extraordinary potential of ordinary love faithfully lived out day by day, year by year, through crying babies and colicky children and all the beautiful chaos of a life fully shared.